All right. There is no deadline in the project of enlightenment, the project of the Dharma, the project of salvation. There's a direction and there's an opportunity. There's an interaction, there's an experience. Uh, but there's no deadline, there's no cutoff point at which you have missed the boat. There's a metaphor that Buddha uses that the Dharma is the raft or the ferry that takes you across the river. When you reach the other side of the river, right, that state of equanimity, that state of enlightenment, nirvana, you no longer need the ferry. But the ferry doesn't run on a time schedule. The ferry is always there waiting. The ferry is never taken to the other side and then left. And those of you who are on the first side are out of luck. There's always a ferry. There's always a way. The Dharma is always there. The possibility of salvation is always there. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is really important, right? It begins with the bedrock conviction that enlightenment, salvation, two different things, part of the same project in my mind, but different things, are both eminently available. We all have Buddha nature, and salvation, that precipitant consciousness in the universe, is ceaselessly available. Right? But we are occluded. We miss the point. We're not omniscient. We don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't have the practice. We are distracted. And so we miss the boat. But the boat is always going to be there when the light bulb goes on, or when we turn towards salvation, when we clarify enough to understand our inner nature of self. Because of the bedrock conviction that every sentient being has both of those capabilities, both of those features, intrinsically, undeniably available. Because of that bedrock conviction, along with that has to come the infinite time available for those seeds to flourish. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have the true, authentic Buddha nature, the wondrous availability of grace and salvation, without the time to allow both to flourish. There is no deadline. This is universalism, I think. I'm not a theologian. And it might make me a heretic. I'm sure it makes me a heretic. There's no moment of judgment. There's no moment where the Buddha pulls the ferry up and says, tough shit. There's no point where Jesus returns and says, you're going to go to hell. I'm prepared to be challenged on both of those statements. But again, with the absolute foundational conviction that you and I and all sentient beings have within us the authentic Buddha nature, and that within the universe, within the divine omniscience, is the offer of salvation and grace. There is the time for all sentient beings to realize both of those. Now, what is time? I don't mean chronology. I don't mean there's 6,000 years available or 6 billion years. I don't even mean, I think, that there is infinite time, infinite progression, infinite chronology. In the same way that there's a bedrock certitude about our authentic nature and the omnipresent, omni-available grace and salvation, the mechanics of this steps outside of time. Right? Perhaps what I'm saying is that there is a singularity and we're just figuring it out. And we figure it out with our manifestation and our corporeal understanding and our limited mind and our experiences and our sensations. Is that the same as saying there is infinite time, or that there is no time, or that there is one time? But this is why the ferry is always there. It's also always on the other side. This is why we are filled with grace and separate at the same time, all available in this singularity. I think it might be that teleological omega point that Teilhard de Chardin talks about. But I haven't read Chardin in a long time, and maybe I need to revisit some of that. I think it might be that hyperspatial object that Terence McKenna talks about. Check some of the videos from last month where I was digging into that a little bit. There's a book by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce, which I just read last month. And the premise of that book is that you are in hell, but hell is a town, a very gray, constrained town. But there's a bus that leaves periodically and goes to heaven, a field filled with angelic beings. And the only thing stopping you from getting on that bus is your own constraint, your own desire to stay within the gray, limited hellscape. Now, I can't remember in that book. I do think there's a sense that at a certain point the bus will stop running, I think. But the back and forth between the two is a choice. Now, it's a choice based on who we are at a given moment. So is that a choice? Right? If I were to go back 10 minutes ago to decide whether to start recording this video, there's no way I could make a different decision. There's no way I could say, there's no way I could go back to yesterday morning when I didn't record a video and record that video. If I were in that same circumstance, there isn't a different me that could then say, no, you know what, I am going to record that video. There was no choice in that moment. And there's no choice except to accept sort of the reality of this dynamic of authentic enlightenment, cosmic grace, and permanent availability. We don't have free will, and yet we're not predetermined. We can shift the direction, but in any given moment, look, one of the reasons I enjoy these videos is because I don't script them, and I say things that I couldn't say any other way, but I didn't decide to say them. So I can always observe myself coming up with what I'm about to say now. We're already there, right? There is no Um, there's nothing to achieve. There's recognition. That dynamic of authentic grace, time. The only thing that prevents me from living in that space is my own obscurations, right? Like the glass of water, the muddy water that's swirling. Set it down, it stops swirling. The precipitant, right? The mud settles to the bottom. All I've done is stop agitating the water. There is no deadline. There is only a direction. But that direction unfolds within the confines of linear chronology. But that confine is the illusion. All right. I think I'm going to leave it there. Hopeful universalism, I think, is the rubric that I've seen that applies to what I'm thinking, how I think about this stuff. But it is important because a lot of what I talk about here, we're all going to die. What happens if you die and you haven't achieved enlightenment? Well, you get to try again. And you have. It's right there.